Sydney is the greatest city in the world. We've got it all, the harbour, the people, the beauty. In 2000, Sydney was electric in the lead up to the Olympics, emerging as an international city. Spectacularly well executed, Semaranch proclaimed them the best games ever. By 2007, Sydney was named the world's best city in the City Brands Index for culture, people, international status, and a place to visit, work, and live. Condé Nast ranked us as the world's #1. In 2011, Condé Nast ranked us again #1, TripAdvisor second best. We won Cruise Destination of the Year, and US Travel and Leisure ranked us 5th, and then again 8th in 2012. In 2013, we ranked 3rd in the City Brands Index, the world's most popular destination for international students as well. From 2010 to 2016, Sydney was ranked the world's best city for festivals and events by the International Festival Association. That's world's best city for festivals and events 7 years in a row. Boy, did we stuff it up. Sydney today has a class action by festival goers over strip searches by police. Strip searches that have increased by 20 times in 10 years. At one point, police were strip searching people at the train station on their way home from work. The New South Wales government argued that the searches, which sometimes involved removing tampons, were reasonable. Honestly, what are we doing? Today it's the only city in the world where it's normalised to be at a pub and have a parade of police with sniffer dogs march in. Tyler Brule, the editor of Monocle, which publishes an annual list of the world's most livable cities, lamented that due to the nanny state, Australia was on the verge of becoming the world's dumbest nation. Last year, Sydney was ranked the 3rd worst in the world for making friends by Time Out magazine, the 2nd worst for nightlife in the global livability rankings, the 6th worst for airport cancellations and 9th for delay, and the 2nd least affordable city in the world. When it was proposed to deliver this keynote, I originally balked at the idea. Sydney is a city of maximum frustration. Leaving work at 9 p.m. that Tuesday, I aimed for a meal on Victoria Street in the Cross, a great eat street of Sydney. Sorry, kitchen's closed, echoed from every single venue. Depressingly, it looked like Betty's Burgers. Sorry, kitchen's closed at 9:11 p.m. I tweeted, what does it take to find a restaurant open after 9 p.m. in Sydney? The responses came in thick and fast. A taxi driver, kebab or Macca's, an alarm clock so you can head out earlier, affordable wages, delusion, a miracle, a sledgehammer, a plane ticket, and what I thought was the most correct answer, a time machine back 15 to 20 years. I thought, Jesus Christ, if they've stuffed up the city, how much they'll stuff it up in the next 20 years? Maybe I should do that keynote after all. Why can't you get a meal in Sydney after 9 p.m. anymore? Let's look at rent, for which a restaurant in Sydney pays around $12,500 per square metre per year. In Manhattan, the world's most popular tourist destination, it's under $10,000. In Los Angeles, it's even cheaper. Unbelievably, Australia also has the highest casual wage in the world at $21.38 an hour. What to actually pay is baffling. We have 122 pay guides, and it's not easy to figure out which one to use. The one missing is the one for the poor sod in Canberra that has to put all these pay guides together. We have an asphalt industry award for anyone in road making and the manufacture and preparation, application laying and fixing of bitumen emulsion, asphalt emulsion, bitumen or asphalt preparations, hot pre-mixed asphalt, cold paper asphalt and mastic asphalt. There's one for pre-mixed concrete, different from the one from concrete products. There's one for the cemetery industry, different from the funeral industry. There's one for the sugar industry, different from the salt industry. They call these modern awards, but what's modern about this? For a restaurant, you think maybe the hospitality award applies. No, that's for hotels, motels, saloons, bars, caterers, casinos, nightclubs, and restaurants, but only in hotels. It's not the fast food award. The correct one is the restaurant award, which applies to catering by a restaurant, but not catering as a business, cafes, tea rooms, roadhouses, and nightclubs that are not in hotels. 91 pages of confusing tables which need a Ouija board, level 1, 2, 3, grades 4, 5, 6. What's the difference between a level 1 food and beverage attendant grade 2 and a level 1 grade 3? Well, the first serves food and beverages, handles cash and provides customer service, while the second provides advanced food and beverage or specialist advice. There's tables depending on the time of day, type of day, and whether it's a holiday. There's tables for adults, tables for 16 years or under, more for 17, 18, 19, and heaven forbid 20-year-olds. Then all the sundries, like $1.93 a day if you bring your own cheese grater. If you want to negotiate a salary, there's an employer's guide to annualised wage arrangements in the hospitality and restaurant industries for Fair Work, which says that you actually can't and actually have to pay overtime and penalty rates still. The penalty rates differ depending on the time of the day, the phase of the moon, and are a mess. In the hospitality award, the evening is 7 p.m. to midnight, but in the restaurant award, 10 till midnight. If you get me this wrong, you're a wage thief. I'll tell you a penalty, and that's not being able to go to a restaurant because it's shut. They don't open past 9 p.m. in Sydney because as the demand for a meal is dropping, wages go up and you need an actuary and an eye of newt to figure out what to pay. So last call's at 9, so they can close at 10 when the complexity rockets up. On the flip side, however, $21.38 an hour for 38 hours a week takes home $709.44. Compared with the average weekly rent of $783, that leaves you with negative $74. The restaurant is trapped between astronomically high rent, labour costs and bureaucracy. On the flip side, despite the highest casual wages in the world, its workers can't afford to live. How did we get here? Peter Thiel says the entire modern political order is predicated on the easy and relentless growth. But most of our political leaders are not engineers or scientists and do not listen to engineers and scientists for that easy and relentless growth. One only has to look at the occupation of the federal ministry. Policy advisor, solicitor, policy advisor, community worker, union organiser, political advisor, healthcare consultant, Aboriginal affairs administrator, union organiser, need I go on. Australia's quite the lucky country, for our top 4 exports are raw materials that we extract out of the ground and stick on a boat. Iron ore, coal, gas and gold. You can't get easier than that. Raw materials for which we are price takers, not price makers. Lucky again, because they keep going up despite not engineering them into more complex, higher margin products. Indeed, Harvard ranks us 91st in the world for economic complexity, a measure of how unique and sophisticated our industry is, behind Kazakhstan, Guatemala and Laos. It's fallen 40 places since 1995, a year when Australia made things like cars, for which we're still taxed $1.5 billion a year, to predict an industry that no longer exists. Australia's manufacturing as a share of GDP is 5.5%, on par with a tax haven like Luxembourg, but worse than Botswana, which sells diamonds and where you can see cheetahs. Our high-tech industry exports $6.3 billion a year, which is 1/150th of China's and 1/26th of South Korea's, a country with a GDP on par with our own. Those 4 commodities, dirt, dead trees, gas from dead trees, and gold, along with 34% of everything we produce, we put on a boat to China, a country we are now totally dependent on and that we have totally pissed off. In return, we take 2% of their exports. Our 5th biggest export is education-related travel services, or a visa factory at our local university, vocational, business or English college. The educational quality of the latter is worse than you'll get binge watching cat videos on TikTok. There are 620,000 students in Australia, equivalent to the populations of Canberra, Darwin and Alice Springs. 45% are studying higher education, 25% vocations and 17% English. About 40% of them are in New South Wales, and by 2025, there'll be 940,000 in the country, and Sydney will host a Canberra. If that sounds weird, in 2022, 573,000 student visas were issued by Australia. The United States issued 414,000. The near record numbers are despite a 40% drop in Chinese students since 2019, the year Australia took the lead in the origin of COVID inquiry, a question that remains to this day, along with Where's Waldo, one of the greatest unanswerable mysteries of the world. The overwhelming majority are from emerging markets, with India surging to 16% and Nepal at 9%. Colombia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Brazil, Indonesia and Pakistan are next. Now, students from India are some of the smartest in the world. IIT has the world's toughest entrance exam, where 1.2 million students compete for 10,000 places. But there's actually a few clues of what's really going on. Australia recently signed up to the mechanism for mutual recognition of qualifications as part of the India Free Trade Agreement. The agreement requires Australia to recognise all official Indian educational qualifications. Like Australia, education is booming at 117 billion US a year. Education is the lubricant of upwards mobility, but like Australia, it's turning into a business that provides that by payment rather than by achievement. A Bloomberg article, "Worthless Degrees Are Creating an Unemployable Generation in India," quoted a former Secretary for School Education that of the 16,000 colleges handing out bachelor's qualifications for teachers, a large number only existed by name. Calling such so-called degrees as being worthless would be by far an understatement, said a former dean at Delhi University. Another clue is Morrison removing the 20-hour per week work cap. The result was a flood of Indian applications so high that Home Affairs had to reject 94% for vocational training. Nepalese applications had to be cut from 85% to 7%, and employment is now limited to 24 hours a week. According to the Home Affairs Minister, we created an underclass of low-paid and exploited workers, leaving international students in limbo and failing to meet the current and future economic challenges faced by the nation. In the same breath, O'Neill announced that all these workers can be permanent residents, a statement that does not logically follow. And this is the big, uncomfortable secret about Australia's easy, relentless growth. The easy, relentless growth that politicians have chosen to take is to blow a property bubble on a scale like no other, one that has driven Australian houses up 8,570%, that's 86 times, in 61 years. Demographia publishes a global housing affordability survey, the measure being the median house price to median household income. If the median house price to median household income is 3 times or less, housing is affordable. 3 times to 4 times, moderately unaffordable. 4 to 5 times, seriously unaffordable. 5 or more, severely unaffordable. Sydney is 13.3 times, the second most expensive in the world. London is 7, New York is 7.1. It's not because Australia is making any more people. Every woman has to have 2.1 kids to maintain the population. Australia is 1.6 and dropping and hasn't been above 2.1 since 1975. House prices are also not driven by wage growth. For the last decade, it's been below 2.5% per annum, but barely above inflation and not going anywhere. Now with inflation at 7% and wage growth at 3.3%, Australians are experiencing the largest decline in real wages ever. Our buying power in last year went back to December 2008. House prices didn't. The average house in Sydney is now $1.2 million. The average wage is $94,000, making it mathematically impossible for the average person to buy the average house. If you borrowed today for the Commonwealth Bank at 6.1%, and I think it's actually gone to 8%, your repayments would be $7,200 a month, every month for 30 years. The monthly post-tax income is $94,000, which is $5,900 a month, leaving you out of pocket $1,300 a month every month for 30 years, assuming you don't eat. In fact, on that wage, the Commonwealth Bank will only lend you $514,000, and only if you lie. Right now, 62% of household incomes, that's 2 people, are needed to service a mortgage in Sydney. Back in the 80s, when interest rates were 17%, it took only 44%. For a modest budget, you could rent a place in Eagle Vale. It's 56 kilometres from Sydney at $130 a week, $520 in bond, and 2 weeks rent in advance. Bring your own small shed or tent for their backyard, open to discussing power, water, Wi-Fi, toilets and showers. In January, a student from China found a tent useful for privacy because for $300 a week, she had to pitch one in a share house living room. The City of Sydney, dystopianly, is putting ads on bus stops for how to grow your own food if you rent. To solve this, the federal government has announced a grand plan to build 1 million homes by 2029. At the same time, it took in 400,000 people net. At this pace, by 2029, we'll be building 1 million homes for 3 million new immigrants, 1 million of which will come to Sydney. Sobering when the Grattan Institute forecast that lifting by 40,000 would lift rents by 5%. We could build more homes, but we already have the 4th highest construction rate in the OECD. The Ryder-Levitt-Bucknell Crane Index tracks cranes worldwide, of which there are 868 in Australia, 365 in Sydney, 189 in Melbourne. There are 10 operating in New York, 17 in San Francisco, and 14 in Chicago. Construction is also now the top sector going bust. This financial year, 1,700 construction companies have entered administration, up 83% due to inflation. It's the grimmest I've seen in 45 years, says the chairman of ASX builder Tamerwood. The Association of Professional Builders says it will get worse. Bank loans for building are at a 15-year low, down 31%, and requiring now a 17 to 32% return on investment. Leaked documents found New South Wales will build 36 homes this year for the next 5 years, when it needs 62,800, a shortfall the planning minister says is greater than we thought. At the same time, RBA Governor Lowe gaslit the Australian public, saying that you were the problem. The price of land is high because the choices that we make as a society of where we live, of how to tax housing, and how we invest in transport. This is the same bubble of Phil that said rates wouldn't go above 0.1% until 2024. Of course, it's not true. It's not your fault. The crisis is engineered. It is by design. A deliberate design feature of our economic architecture, quoting a former finance minister. The US uses quantitative easing to drive easy, relentless growth. Australia uses quantitative peopling. In the year to March, Australia grew by a record 523,000, following which Albanese added 500 staff and 42 million to clear 600,000 in a visa backlog. This is not about growth, but about inflating demand for housing. It's not about the economy, but inflating GDP, because population growth does not increase GDP per capita. Minister O'Neill said our country faces genuine and significant challenges providing safe, affordable housing for Australians. These problems are not caused by migrants. I guess she thinks that the Canberra-sized armada in each year are all nicely in tents in someone's backyard. So high is immigration that migration agent is listed on the skilled occupation list. And Brickworks, the largest brick manufacturer in Australia, is demanding we bring in more migrants as bricklayers to build more houses for migrants. New South Wales bears the brunt, importing people on an industrial scale. Before COVID, 730,000 a year were coming in, to replace 450,000 leaving a year, to net 270,000. New South Wales population is only 8 million. So you have this huge stream coming in and a huge stream fleeing for cheaper places to live. 30% of the country is now born overseas, the highest among Western nations. In New South Wales, it's 35%. Here, 33% have both parents born in Australia and 43% have both parents born overseas. The turnstile of migration into Sydney last financial year netted out to 55,000 going mainly into Parramatta in the inner south, displacing 52,000 Sydney-siders who leave, 40% to the country, 60% to Queensland and other states. Births minus deaths at another 35,000, and the inbound is going to skyrocket, with Sydney forecast to grow from 5.3 to 6.1 million by 2033. Now, the solution is to build a third city called Bradfield in outer southwest Sydney, next to the new Western Sydney International Airport, and not far from Eaglevale, where you can rent a backyard to put up a tent for $130 a week. The third city will be 60% the size of the CBD. The location does have its challenges, however, such as being the hottest place in the world. That's what it was in 2020 when it reached 48.9 degrees Celsius. The Australia Institute found that Western Sydney is among the most affected regions of Sydney when it comes to extreme heat. Its inland position at the foothills of the Blue Mountains prevents the cooling impact of a coastal breeze and works to trap heat. It's projected to have the highest number of days over 35 degrees Celsius a month a year by 2050. By 2090, it will double. Human influence compounds this through the removal of heat-reducing green spaces, replacing them with materials such as concrete and asphalt. 2018 and 2019 both had over 44 days, outstripping the worst case. I'm also not an urban planner, but I'd guess that removing, say, 114 hectares of green space and replacing that with concrete and asphalt city might make things worse. Since mortality increases by 20% over 30 degrees for 24 hours and heat causes 55% of all natural hazard deaths, a better name for Bradfield might be hell. I also presume Bradfield is where they expect all the teachers, police, and hopefully the firefighters and paramedics will live. If you're going to build a city where there's apartments, you need road and rail. Material costs are a 30-year high, and somehow, despite 730,000 coming into New South Wales each year, labourers have remained unchanged at 300,000 for a decade. It won't be 300,000 for long, with every tradie heading up to Brisbane for the 2032 Olympics and better pay. Costs are blowing out. The 30-kilometre Sydney and South West Metro is budgeted at $12 billion and is now $20.5 billion, the same price as Trump's 732-kilometre wall. The Grattan Institute estimates that 28% of billion-dollar projects are blowing out, the median blowout being $627 million. All up, the New South Wales government will spend $116 billion on infrastructure to accommodate all these new people. Given Premier Minns campaigned on a platform of ending privatisation, one might wonder how we're going to pay for all of this if it's going to stay on the books. Well, the answer is debt, and New South Wales will be in it deep, $187 billion deep by 2026. Naturally, the government says, surprise, the interest rate is higher than we expected at 5.2% and climbing, costing taxpayers $6.8 billion a year by 2026, more than was collected last year from land tax, pokies, the casinos, health insurance, parking levies combined. As they say in public policy, the dildo of consequences rarely arrives lubed. With mass immigration driving out of control inflation, property costs, infrastructure demands, construction collapses, business insolvencies, debt, and the greatest erosion of Australian living standards on record, one might think something might break soon. You might also be thinking, who exactly do these politicians think they're working for? Government of the people, by the people, for the people. Which people exactly? This is with the backdrop of 5 banks with over $2 trillion in assets failing in 50 days. Credit Suisse, Silvergate, Signature, First Republic, and Silicon Valley Bank. At Silicon Valley Bank, business was good. Deposits are up 4 times in 4 years. The problem was borrowing short and lending long, investing $91 billion in T-bills and mortgage-backed securities at a crappy yield of 1.56%. And like the GFC, all the Fed needed to do was lift rates to 5.25% and all debt became untenable. Startups spending cash for longer forced a $21 billion loss selling those bonds, leading to a bank run at SVB, the most critically important bank in technology. Now, another critically important bank fell into this trap, losing $45 billion on $538 billion, resulting in negative equity of $12 billion. Those losses are on Australian government bonds, and that bank is the Reserve Bank of Australia. Going too hard during COVID, they now own equivalent of 22% of GDP. For the last 50 years, it's been 7%. To stop inflation, you typically need to raise rates above it, otherwise there's no incentive to save instead of spend. The Taylor rule, looking at the Consumer Price Index, says the rate should be at least 7%. They're currently at 3.85. And if you don't look at the Fantasy Football Index and look at the price of sirloin down my pub index, last year it was running at 8.5% or $38. This year it's over 26% at $48. And that would mean rates more like 1982, when they were 16.5%. Certainly the debt and the money printing today is much higher. It's clear that interest rates will keep rising, straining bank profits and liquidity as asset values decrease, with limited options for intervention. It's not practical for the Fed or the RBA to guarantee all deposits, as both are losing money in negative equity and lack liquidity. Banks will continue to tighten lending and a recession is likely to emerge. Now, you might also be surprised to know that Commonwealth Bank has a larger market cap than Goldman Sachs, and NAB has a bigger one than UBS even after the purchase of Credit Suisse. CBA's latest results look good, but 70% of their book is home loans, a staggering $639 billion. Business loans are $150 billion and consumer finance $17 billion. Unlike the global financial crisis, however, deposits cover 75%. But just like Silicon Valley Bank, deposits can burn down in tough times, especially when paying 0.00% interest, which is what they pay. Business deposits are falling. Taylor David says we're in an insolvency Armageddon with 6,000 going to administration year to date. 41% of them are in New South Wales. Retail deposits have been rising with no small contribution from 400,000 people a year needing a bank account. Quite the flywheel has been created. The Big Four plus Macquarie are 22% of the ASX 200, and every month 10.5% of the Australian wage bill flows into super, soon to be 12%. 16% of that super goes directly into property, 23% into the stocks, of which 22% of the ASX 200 are the banks. So relentlessly each month, 5% of the Australian wage bill goes into bank stocks, which helps bidding them up, which helps them to lend to mortgages. Australian homeowners are now in mortgage hell. Negative cash flow and unable to refinance due to serviceability requirements. NAB says 20% of their book is in hell now. And if you borrow between August 19 and July 22, 40% are in hell. Many have dynamic loan-to-value ratios where values are forecast to drop 20%. And during 2020 and 2021, Australian banks lent $394 billion in fixed mortgages as low as 1.95% over 3 years. $350 billion will reset this year with variable rates triple. The brunt's hitting now, like right now, this quarter. 17% of all fixed rate mortgages are rolling off and 15% next. If this sounds familiar, it should. There's a movie where a financial disaster was created from excessive risky lending, particularly adjustable rate mortgages with low teaser rates that exploded after 2 to 3 years, and explode they did. In that movie, Steve Carell talks to a stripper who has 5 houses and a condo, who didn't realise her repayments could triple. Hey, there's a bubble, short it. That was The Big Short, and that was Steve Eisman making $7 billion. Today's stripper in a mortgage mine is a daily feature in the media. Garbage train driver reveals how he built a 13-home property portfolio worth $12 million while earning less than McDonald's workers. Western Sydney ex-McDonald worker now owns 40 homes worth $20 million. How Sydney dad owns 13 properties despite periods of joblessness. Reckless and dangerous financial advice pumped at you day and night. The tail wags the dog, as Domain is 34% of Nine's market cap and realestate.com.au is 74% of News Corp's. Albanese must have recently been to a strip club because he's gone full Burko on immigration. Increasing permanent migration to 195,000, abolishing the skills list, guaranteeing 2.1 temporary migrants a path to citizenship, halving the withholding tax on foreign developers, mulling rent caps, and allowing New Zealanders citizenship. What's next, Tasmanians? Julie Collins MP, the Minister for Housing, who owns 5 homes and is unironically the Minister for Homelessness, announced from July 1st the eligibility for the first home guarantee and 2 others will be expanded to include those that haven't had a home for a decade, permanent residents, and 2 individuals, siblings, a parent, cousins, a child, and 2 friends. I guess the guy who won't stop talking about being brought up by a single mum in a housing commission flat wants the rest of Australia to go through that experience. None of this is about making housing affordable. It's a late-stage Ponzi move about getting last suckers to keep buying at a stratospheric 13.3 times household income. A Ponzi because a constant stream of new fools are needed to keep buying to make those that did feel rich. But like all Ponzi's, sooner or later, the number of chumps you need becomes untenable and the whole thing is undone. Australia's household debt to GDP is the 5th highest in the OECD, 211% of net disposable income and rising, double the US, a country usually associated with credit cards and debt. As of March, 61% of Australian households were in renting stress. 48% of households with mortgages are in mortgage stress, where stress is defined as outgoings greater than income. 20 years ago, both were under 15%, and in New South Wales, 70% of renters, 70, are in rental stress. This cannot go on for much longer. What's crazy about this Ponzi is that 69% of immigrants are in rental stress, with outgoings also greater than incomings. The second worst group after the elderly. That's why they say migrants are net contributors to the economy, because they're drawing down savings from home to live. The 53,900 skilled migrant threshold results in $863 a week after tax, barely enough to eat and rent a tent. Raising it to $70K might allow an upgrade to a shed. We're at that point in the Ponzi where we're potentially importing future welfare recipients to keep the game going. Anglicare's annual rent report surveyed 46,000 listings. 345 were affordable on a full-time minimum wage, 162 on the age pension, 66 on disability support, 4 on job seeker, and 0 on the youth allowance. This is the first time we have ever seen the number of affordable listings for a full-time minimum wage earner crash to below 1%. The Property Club predicts with 190,000 new migrants, the number of homeless in Sydney will explode. The yield curve is inverted, and the New York Fed predicts a 58% of chance of recession. This is where the economy contracts, spending crimps, and defaults on loans and jobs are lost. It's not a question of if the property bubble will pop, but when. The US, the UK, Spain, and Portugal, and Ireland all blew bubbles during the GFC, but they all let them pop. Australia kept blowing. Despite what politicians say, there's never been a soft landing for an asset bubble. And keep blowing they do, citing chronic skills shortages. We do need some technical skills because despite kids' dreams of working for companies like Tesla or Canva, they can't link school to learning what they've learned to those careers. When I left high school, I thought engineering had something to do with driving trains, and sadly last careers day I saw nothing has changed. Programmers and analysts are indeed the top skill brought into the country, but the quality today is truly awful. Of 220 applicants I had last week for a software role, 220 were unsuitable. Next are not engineers, nurses or entrepreneurs, but chefs and cooks for accommodation and food, of which has the most migrants at 40% of workers and the highest rate of insolvency. This is the actual skills crisis that politicians primarily bleat about, a crisis created by themselves. Cafes can't find workers because despite paying the highest casual wages in the world, the locals can't make it work with the cost of living. So we import people and trick them for a while to work in a cafe before they realise they can't afford it either. And unless the robots do it, these poor sods will end up wiping bums, as 85s and over are going to 1 million and 65 and over doubling to 6.5 million by 2042. Over 86% of young growing families with mortgages are in mortgage stress, so it's no surprise the locals aren't having kids. The unfortunate thing is this is all happening at the same time as AI is being unleashed upon the world. And if you think the internet was transformative, just wait for generative AI, it's going to be bigger. The breakthrough was the transformer, allowing large language models to consume large amounts of data, now 10% of the internet, soon to be all of it. What actually comes out, however, is dark juju magic. It can now answer any questions, speak any language, draw illustrations indistinguishable from photographs, and is now learning to write software. Any job that you can do, the AI can do better, at least jobs using a computer. For now. ChatGPT had 100 million users in 2 months, the fastest in history. It currently scores in the top 1% for verbal in the GRE for US grad school, the top 7% in the SAT for undergrad, top 10% in the uniform bar exam, top 12% in the LSAT, and top 15% in advanced placement, statistics, art history, psychology, and biology. Every day the AI sucks down more data, and every day they're getting smarter. Where it fails for now is what we perceive as creativity. It's hard to get ChatGPT to crack a joke that isn't a dad joke, but as we give it more data, we're seeing more intelligent behaviours that we don't understand and we didn't predict. Scientists are wondering if we're starting to see sparks of artificial general intelligence, creativity, heart and soul might just emerge. The next biggest job for migrants is being a GP, and not that will be many soon with ChatGPT. The 8% of the population trying to wangle a Valium or oxycodone will be happy to hear about that. A study comparing ChatGPT to GPs saw patients preferring the AI 79% of the time, with responses 4 times longer, 4 times better quality, and 10 times more empathetic. Motor mechanics will follow, with electric vehicles we need less of, and accountants, I still feel sorry for accountants, because together with OnlyFans models, AI is going to wipe them out. Half of white-collar admin jobs will go, and accounting is rules-based. There's no room for creativity, or for being creative, the government doesn't like it. Half of lawyers are next. With the exception of deal-making or Charles Water Street theatricals, most is drafting, and ChatGPT can do it better. Instead of paying a lawyer $1,200 an hour in 6-minute increments, ChatGPT can write an argument, a letter, patents, research, explain a case, file a suit, or fight your parking ticket in seconds for free. Minter Ellison, Australia's largest law firm, panicked first. Many of our clients have really been grappling with the question of whether billable hours are the best way to measure our value as professional advisors. Le jeu sont faits, the game is up. Wads of legal bills annotated with read email, pull out template, edit, pretend I did something, teleconference with partner, reply to email are over. Frankly, software will be next and even more amenable to LLMs. I told my engineers there's a chance in the next 12 months they won't be writing code anymore. At least not like now. They'll move up the stack and be more like producers, product managers, or directors. Mass layoffs are coming. We're going to see the same social displacement and upheaval that the mechanisation of agriculture caused in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the mechanisation of manufacturing caused in the 20th century. Only this time it's with the intellectual classes. The first contributed to the Long Depression of the 1870s, and the latter led to the Great Depression of the 1920s. The higher paying the job, the more vulnerable it is. IBM just announced it's going to stop hiring, and 8,000 jobs in the next 5 years will be replaced by AI, including 30% of all non-customer facing roles. Education, our 5th biggest export, will be heavily impacted. Researchers have found that 19 of 30 jobs, the top 19 of 30 jobs most likely to be wiped out are post-secondary teaching. AI can already develop a curriculum better, personalised to a student's strengths, weaknesses, and learning style. You can now chat to a textbook as if it was a professor. Check the textbook company saw their stock fall 48% when they admitted ChatGPT was affecting their business. This might cause a problem in maintaining Australia's scientific edge, giving teaching cross-funds research. But the bulk of immigration is not for that, or for entrepreneurs that create jobs rather than take jobs. It's designed for serving as coffees and to keep the bubble alive. Yet it's almost impossible to get a meal in Sydney after 9, so rare that it became a campaign talking point for Dave Sharma and Allegra Spender last federal election, after Woollahra Council tried stopping an Indian diner from serving kebabs after midnight. This is the same Woollahra Council that launched a nighttime economy and footway dining plan, the result of which was the end of late night dining in Woollahra Council. One might be cynical about the motive, given Double Bay is now an apartment construction zone. Sydney used to be fun until developers, politicians, casinos, wowsers, media and council shut down 176 venues by gaslighting the public that violence has spiralled out of control, when Sydney had just won an award for being the safest and friendliest city in the world. These geniuses knocked down the venues for, surprise, more apartments, planning the move to nightlife to Barangaroo Zone 24/7, conveniently close to the casinos. There, a row of restaurants were built, which all close now at 9 p.m. because they built apartments there too. And like Captain Renault in Casablanca, they were shocked to find there was money laundering going on here, and that the business model of Australian casinos was to launder money out of China, a country whose citizens are prohibited from sending more than $50,000 a year overseas, and despite it being illegal to own foreign property outside of China, seem to own a decent number of places from Vancouver, Auckland to Sydney. So just like moving the Powerhouse Museum to a floodplain, every decision in Sydney is driven by apartments. Just look at any old gig poster to see how it's changed. You used to be able to go out on a Wednesday and see bands like INXS, Midnight Oil and the Hoodoo Gurus, from Cremorne to Camaret, maybe dollar drinks, maybe to 4 a.m. You can't buy anything for $1 anymore, which gets us onto the point of corruption. Transparency International rates Australia the world's worst money laundering property market, one of only 3 countries where accountants, lawyers and real estate agents are not required to report suspicious transactions or do due diligence on customers. New South Wales is the worst state in Australia, where the average price of the house is contact agent and the amount paid and beneficial ownership are not required to be public. New South Wales has 1,200 counsellors and they're the best money can buy. Apart from stuffing up the fun, the only real power is the influence they have over development. Councillors are paid nothing. $9,500 a year for small metro, $19,000 for regional city. Mayors are paid $10,000 to $40,000 unless you're Clover Moore, in which you're paid substantially more. One is asking for corruption when councillors have influence over billions but paid a pittance. Thus, ICAC is busy. Operation Hector in the inner west, Operation Galley in Hurstville and Georges River, Operation Dasher in Canterbury, and of course Operation Keppel in Wagga Wagga. Now Ray Williams is claiming senior members of his party were paid significant funds to install new councillors in the Hillshire for a developer. My parents, ready to retire, owned a warehouse in Rhodes, a suburb being bulldozed for more apartments. They were content with the well-exhibited plan until one morning the plan with no explanation suddenly changed, for the few had yet to sell to the major developer. A road was put through one guy's land. For my parents and neighbours, controls were gerrymandered, height setbacks and FSR such that only a minaret could be built now, or sold to the developer at a fire sale price. The kicker, Freedom of Information revealed council openly pondering relocating zoning to deliver these developers a return on their investment. So who do you complain to when the Mayor of Canada Bay, General Manager, Town Planner, major and minor developers, the go-betweens, are all being investigated by ICAC in Operation Tolosa? Our local MP was found to be engaged in serious corrupt conduct and influencing council decisions in an unrelated matter in Operation Whitney, and the Premier and her boyfriend were being investigated by Operation Keppel. You can't make this stuff up. Tolosa was better than the Sopranos. ICAC is at the top of their game. The surveillance photos of envelopes of cash, shoeboxes of cash and rubber bands, and a phone tap of the mayor's partner, a councillor from yet another council, gleefully asking if he got his cashy. The whole system of development in the state sucks, and I would struggle to believe there's any council where the corrupt influence from developers helping councils build rubber band collections and shoeboxes isn't the everyday way of doing business. Thus, the challenges for Sydney 2050 are many and complex. The root of all evil is the cost of property that squeezes life and soul out of everything. There's no justification for Sydney being the second most expensive property market in the world. With the highest inflation in decades, sharply declining real wages growth, worst rental crisis on record, overloaded infrastructure, construction blowouts, bureaucracy, mass insolvencies, extreme cost of living, and the largest destruction of purchasing power in 50 years, the solution, as always, is more people, despite this being the cause. It's sending the Australian middle and working class into poverty. It's politically untenable, and frankly, I think, morally wrong and a national disgrace. At this point, either wages have to go up 50%, or house prices have to halve. Businesses can only afford to increase wages if they cut half their staff, and the AI may indeed sack them. Skilled migration programs can be very beneficial, but they're supposed to strike a balance between meeting labour market needs and ensuring the well-being of both local and immigrant populations. We have a skills shortage in some areas because we neglected skilling up our own citizens, overhauling education, and letting brain drain persist for decades. Australia used to have an economy that made things, but instead we turned it into a Ponzi dependent upon mass migration in order to buy houses, consume things, and make us coffee. The Ponzi is in its late and final stage, and like all Ponzis, unsustainable. The only question is the collateral damage. Many coming here will find they can't afford to live, many in search of jobs that we never needed or may no longer exist. Goldman Sachs predicts AI will take 300 million jobs and 25% of all jobs in the US and Australia. That's all jobs in Australia, 25%. New jobs will be created, but will we skill up fast enough before the AI takes them too? If a job uses a computer, it can be done better, faster, cheaper by an AI-powered freelancer. In short, the country is bankrupt from the federal government's $1 trillion in debt through the Reserve Bank, state, household and consumer. The piper eventually has to be paid, and we can only kick the can down the road so long for a while. Many debts cannot be paid off or even serviced for much longer. The options are to default or inflate them away. In the 1850s, the discovery of gold near Ballarat Bathurst, sparked the greatest gold rush in history. 500,000 came here seeking their luck, igniting a property boom. From 1880 to 1884, Sydney land went up 80% and doubled in Melbourne in 87. Does this sound familiar? Commodity prices eventually soured, the banks pulled back lending, causing house prices to halve, GDP to collapse, and a run of the banks, which depositors had to recapitalise. The crisis of the 1890s was deeper and more prolonged than the Great Depression. And if you bought at the top of the market, it took 70 years to break even. Crisis does lead to opportunity, but real issues need to be solved. The die has been cast for economic, social, and political instability for years to come. Government must find its way back to being a government of the people, by the people, for the people, rather than a government of bringing in too many people, squeezing the people, and gaslighting and controlling the people. House prices and the cost of living needs to be urgently addressed, which means immigration needs to slow down. The targeting and quality of such needs to be substantially improved. The education, skills, and training of existing population needs to be lifted, particularly in manufacturing, health, technology, and the trades, and to prepare for AI. It needs to be easier to run a business, and it's imperative to improve economic diversification, complexity, and value add of our products and services to drive a real rise in real wages and GDP per capita. There needs to be a significant rethink of how education and healthcare are delivered, and serious regulatory reform in real estate and local government. Peering through the Overton window, we often find a sideshow setting the agenda, distracting us from the real issues. What's really happening in the world? How is the country really being run? For whose benefit? How is the world evolving? And where are we headed? And most importantly, why can't you get a meal after 9? Thank you.